So hi everyone, I'm Ranjan, founder and CEO of DecisionX. Primarily, what we're doing is building this decision infrastructure for enterprise. And largely, if you look at enterprise, it's there is always a constant trade-off between the quality of decision making that one can make or the speed of decision making that one can have. So for us, the KPI has been what is the decision quality that we are able to improve in
Hmm.
terms of decision success rate, in terms of blind spots that we are able to surface. So for that, we have been building this decision infrastructure. Um, Primarily, if you look at decision making, it's about like decision making sort of in an enterprise takes reasoning. Reasoning takes a good amount of organizational understanding or the context, and
Hmm.
the context requires ontology. So what we have today as agenda is pretty much three parts. First is where we have some panelists, and we'll be talking about that, where we'll hear firsthand industry overview in terms of how this whole decision intelligence or decision infrastructure has evolved over a period of last decade. Second part, we are showing Ontology Studio live, where we'll be showing the whole demo of Ontology Studio, where we bring in some state of art work in terms of how decision ontology is being built alongside domain ontology and data ontology. And then the third part is pretty much Q&A. Feel free to drop in your questions as we go about the session, as and when you have. Towards the end, we will follow through with as many questions as we can. So that's just a three-part simple flow of the session today. Uh, I think I would like to introduce my panelists. I have got Rishank with me. Rishank is Chief Ontology Officer at DecisionX, two-time entrepreneur, and pretty much build all things. He will be talking all things ontology and how the Ontology Studio sort of works. I have Ashwini with me. Ashwini is a veteran in the space, currently Chief Strategy and AI Officer at Genesis Group. Prior to Genesis, he has been part of organizations like Brilio, Capital One, pretty much seen a whole Accenture AI practice, pretty much seen the whole advent of AI and decision intelligence firsthand from both sides of the table, buying and selling side, and pretty much at a enterprise and super enterprise way as it relates to financial services, as it relates to large consumer brands. I think his perspective would be immensely helpful. Welcome, Rishank and Ashwini, to the
Hmm.
session. With that, I will hand it over to Rishank to take the session forward. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, thanks a lot for that wonderful introduction. I think we would just want to start off by getting a lay of land from Ashwini since he's been a seasoned operator. So the way we were thinking about this was we could spend the first few minutes learning from his worldviews of what exists out there, what are the gaps, and then we'll sort of build it up toward what is our approach in his worldview, and then just get into the meaty portions of showing the contrasts that we have heard from customers and what is out there, and show the Ontology Studio live. So yeah, thanks again for coming here, Ashwini, and spending some valuable time here. So yeah, I mean, we had a bunch of questions, and to be very frank, even before this webinar, when people had learned that you are coming in here, I was barraged with a set of questions to ask, and so I had to sort of cluster them together to bring it to a point where we can have a good structured conversations. So I mean, the first one comes more from the angle of having seen all the cycles, right? I mean, at the end of the day, building software is abstraction laddering. You are always coming up with a new abstraction to solve for all the sort of constant problems that exist out there, of which there are a lot. And I remember us having the talk that day of how sort of across the waves, right? From the day there was talks of behavior driven development to classic ML systems to the pre LLM deep learning era and to today when we talk about agent harnesses, multi agent systems, so on and so forth. Um, I mean, would you want to just start off by telling the audience what is truly new in the post LLM world versus the practices and philosophies that continue to hold true throughout, regardless of the abstraction that we are actually working with? I think that would give them a good mental model to think through things, especially with all new news pouring in every day. So yeah, that's pretty much the first question, Ashwini.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, first of all, Ranjan and Rishank.
Sure.
Great to chat on this topic. Yeah, I think we can go even beyond, especially for banking,
Yeah.
how things used to be. Banks still used to, for example, give loans even in the
Hmm.
90s when we were still figuring out how to digitize, right?
Hmm.
So some
Yeah.
of the some of the things that don't change for businesses to adopt technology are uh, business processes, or more
Hmm.
importantly, business decisions that you
Hmm.
have to, right? For example, if you have to give out a loan, you have to make an underwriting decision based on who the
Hmm.
customer is, what his credit risk is, does he
Hmm.
have ability to pay, etc., etc. Right?
Hmm.
And so some of those decisions remain constant, and
Hmm.
the information businesses seek or wish they had to make those decisions also
Hmm.
remain more or less in the same, dimensional world in terms of what you need to know about. Let's say if it's a mortgage loan, you would want to know about the
Hmm.
customer, you would want to know about, the property in question. You want
Hmm.
to get details about what the customer has done in the past with
Hmm.
other loans, etc. So what has technology done, right, through
Hmm.
many different phases? For example, we figured out how to digitize information and capture it and put it into a
Hmm.
workflow that automated some of those information capture workflows where customers could upload documents and you
Hmm.
could digitize all of them, extract information, etc. It
Hmm.
didn't just digitize the workflows, it also
Hmm.
generated more data, gave us access to unstructured data because documents now came in,
Yeah.
photos came in, etc., etc. But once that data started to come in,
Hmm.
and you have that data, you need intelligence to make information available from that data.
Fair.
Um,
Hmm.
and then deep learning and some of the concepts that we have got to with Gen AI using encoders, decoders, models, etc. They've got us to a point where we can now extract information. Then
Hmm.
you intelligently connect, extend, predict using those data points to
Hmm.
informed and intelligent decisions, right? So the
Hmm.
decisions that you want to make and the data that you want to have uh,
Hmm.
are the two constant things that if you talk to a functional expert or a business leader, he would have clarity on those two. Now, how
Hmm.
do I make that data available? And then
Hmm.
how to connect that data
Hmm.
in a manner where we can make more informed decisions, even better decisions,
Hmm.
is where some of the intelligence layers come in. Right, those decisions started to get codified. Uh,
Fair.
for example, people started to create scorecards and scores.
Hmm.
What we saw in last, what we were seeing in last 2 decades before the Gen AI and agentic AI era is people
Hmm.
had a lot of, you needed to push for adoption of technology because people wanted to understand what this technology is capable of. Uh,
Hmm.
in the Gen AI era, where 2022 and 2023 beginning, I think people now can themselves use technology on their in their handhelds, etc., right, on
Yeah.
phones. So they don't have to be told what is possible, right? They are
Hmm.
now waking up to what is possible, and you have to now say how will it apply to their not just for their personal needs on their phones, for example, but how can
Yeah.
they actually make use of it for the
Fair.
enterprise.
Yeah.
So I think where we have got to now is some of the knowledge that you had to
Hmm.
look for has been
Hmm.
encoded, and
Yeah.
that's you have decoder
Hmm.
the solutions or platforms like
Hmm.
ChatGPT and some of these LLMs that we have,
Yeah.
and now the knowledge is now codified, and the idea is to then bring it together. So earlier people were going after how can I use the understanding that I have from the world knowledge. uh,
Yeah.
they said, oh, I need to make it contextual because general purpose knowledge does not solve for nuances that you may have for loan
Hmm.
underwriting, for example, since
Yeah.
I since I picked that earlier, right? So the context started to become more and more important. And
Hmm.
then in context, you realize, oh, not everything can be solved by via just LLMs. You still need to do computations. You still need to do employ machine learning techniques, etc. And you need to take actions because once you take decisions,
Hmm.
you're able to enact. Actually, after loan underwriting, you want to send out. uh,
Hmm.
the loan docket or a welcome docket to the customer. If you are
Yeah.
seeing dashboards, you want to be able to make a decision on reallocation of your marketing budget allocation. You want to be able to make that reallocation, right? So
Hmm.
I think that is where agentic workflows and reimagining possibilities. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, as you started to say, reimagine possibilities
Hmm.
for a given workflow,
Hmm.
like underwriting in this case, marketing, recommendations and customer journeys, for example, personalized customer journeys, etc. I think
Hmm.
that is where people realize, oh, context is even more important, right? So that is
Yeah.
where being able to use these technologies, which is becoming more and more, available, commoditized, etc. How do we bring all of this together to solve for the purpose?
Yeah.
And defining that purpose and defining that purpose in the context which is understood like a
Hmm.
human would understand by the machine is
Hmm.
becoming significantly important, and that is what is, I think, in next few years, being
Yeah.
able to sort of bring that together in a manner where machine understands it like the human does,
Yeah.
and human has comfort with that understanding to be able to
Hmm.
consume what the machine throws their way, right? Um,
Makes sense. Yeah.
that is where I think, the world is going in a. We can go more specifics, right, based on interest, but yeah,
No,
with that.
fair, Ashwini. I think the kind of things that you have mentioned, if I had to put out my takeaways from this, I think the first bit is just that encoder layer being the play that used to take a lot of time, effort, thinking through is something that is largely there. The hard part now is inference or decoding it for specific workflows. And then the second aspect becomes that as you start reimagining workflows, being able to figure out what is the beginning state, what is the end state, what are the transitions, all of this becomes super important. And those transitions or what those states would be is something that stays true regardless of the underlying technology powering it, because that is all that is driven by purpose. But when it comes to enterprises today, I think you mentioned right that while AI has given some outcomes to, let's say, personal use cases, it's able to, let's say, search well, at least don't have to go through a bunch of blue links anymore. It's able to summarize well. But when it comes truly to enterprises, the outcomes have largely been restricted to the black boxes of CX and coding, right? Like things that have had a very verifiable output. And then typically when we look at reports, and I'm not just referring to the pop culture reports of MIT, but also let's say A16Z came out with a report where it was mentioning how much spend is there on AI versus the ROI that has been there. We see that the enterprise adoption has been low, and their typical expectations across 24, 25, where they were trying to put LLMs on data and figure something out and so on and so forth, has typically been low. So why do you think that has happened? And I'm assuming that people today have started to realize, right, the importance of a context layer or the importance of context. But even then, we don't really see the realization maturing to meaningful outcomes. So why do you think that enterprise adoption is still low when it comes to like
Yeah,
AI giving the meaningful outcomes?
yeah. I just saw, I think, one LinkedIn post, I don't remember from who,
Hmm.
where AI recommended, somebody showed a mushroom, and asked
Okay.
the AI whether, you know,
Yeah.
whether this is good to eat. And AI was, yeah, looks like a mushroom, you can eat it.
Yeah.
The guy ate it. It was unfortunately poisonous, and the guy died. And the
So that
the
escalated way too quickly.
and AI said, "Oh, sorry, let me learn from it. I'll do better next time." Now, unfortunately, that risk is not something that you can actually take for in production workflows, right? I mean, not at all for customer facing use cases for regulated industries where
Hmm.
you mismanage one slice of PII information and they're
Yeah.
fines for getting levied on you, etc. Right? So I think
Hmm.
uh, I take a lot of sometimes I use food industry or housing industry, car industry as examples because they are more evolved industries that have seen technology evolution. Uh,
Hmm.
See how that is getting applied to what is happening to our industry, right? Where, for
Hmm.
example, in autonomous cars,
Hmm.
You would not deploy them on, let's say, some of the Indian roads in Bangalore
Yeah.
without seeing how would it actually work in Bangalore, knowing that I have all the sensors in place, I have all the computations in place to be able to stop in time, etc. Is just not good enough, right?
Hmm.
So I think, and like coming back to, and if you look at housing, for example, right, or food industry,
Hmm.
they cater to the same sort of hospitals,
Yeah.
in healthcare. You'll have banks like housing. You'll make buildings for banks, right? You'll make buildings for retail companies as outlets, etc. So I think, so where I'm going is, let's say this data analytics, AI, technology industry is also serving similar uh,
Fair. Yeah.
industries.
Hmm.
Uh, One of the things that I know of, I will not name that company, but there are many such companies that,
Hmm.
for example, despite having large teams and they obviously understood the potential of what is possible,
Hmm.
they prevented anything which is using Gen AI or agentic AI to go live into like full-fledged production being
Hmm.
used by end users. Forget customers, even internal end users, because they wanted to first define what is required internally to control what goes live. And one of the examples that one of my banking friends were giving me was,
Hmm.
people think, oh, you can get insights from BI so easily, right? Do text to SQL
Hmm.
and insights.
Hmm.
But according to him, that is the most dangerous thing, because
Yeah.
if a CXO or a senior leader or even an operations leader is taking a decision based on something
Hmm.
which is either wrong or doesn't explain the insights that is put or served based on the query that this person asked,
Hmm.
not explained right, or it's not presented right, and you make a
Hmm.
wrong decision, which
Yeah.
might let your marketing campaign run with wrong budget alignments, like we were discussing, or your supply chain going for a toss, you not having enough inventory, for example, has
Hmm.
a big impact, right? So he, and then if you take it one notch higher, if you're
Hmm.
actually putting something out, it has a
Hmm.
even bigger impact. You cannot go wrong to the streets. You cannot go wrong to your investors, regulators, etc. So
Hmm.
even for something as simple as conversational insights, it just
Yeah.
cannot go live like that, right? So
Hmm.
I would say I sometimes sort of, because you start to get spiritual as you get older, right? I think it's like you have a body like which you are trying to mimic what human body can do with AI. It
Hmm.
needs regulation, right?
Yeah.
And some sense in Indian mythology, you have the seven chakras, but
Yeah.
essentially what they're trying to do is making sure, I mean, what enterprises are trying to do is
Hmm.
making sure they have, basic data security sort of covered,
Hmm.
PII, PIA, how do you manage policies, privacies, IAM policies, for example, how
Hmm.
to make sure that all the FinOps, etc. The ROI that you thought that you will get, you
Yeah.
get productivity benefit, but you actually burn up more cash in deploying that solution, right?
Hmm.
Is it responsible? Is it throwing insights but in a language that I don't want? Is it
Hmm.
trustable,
Yeah.
trustworthy, where you're grounding things, you're explaining things where you can build that trust, and
Hmm.
then being able to do it in a manner where it is aligning with the enterprise, policies, and how policies govern each of the business process workflows, right? So yeah, I think, if you have a car that can go fast, you also
Yeah.
need seat belts and ADAS systems and
Yeah.
all your airbags, etc., in place, working in synchrony so that you have the right kind of safety. So
Hmm.
safety, cost, making sure that it can scale. How you do one versus how you do another is not different. I think some of those considerations have really not allowed this to scale.
Hmm.
As we solve for those things, where
Hmm.
insights become, and decisions like your platforms is DecisionX, right,
Yeah.
become more reliable, you'll see more adoption. But I think that's the work that we need to.
Yeah, so we have some questions from one of the audience that can we move to the ontology subject? No offense. I think we promised the ontology and we're going to show that. Ashwini, just one question before we move into that. As you look at ontology as a subject, right? And then I think
Hmm.
ontology is not new. It's been something that has been built and been building for a long time, and it has existed.
Hmm.
And there's now ontology agents and obviously ways to build the ontology really faster and high quality and all that stuff. Uh, Purely coming from the enterprise stack, right? When you look at data warehouses are there, there's application, there is ontology agents as such. How do you see this stack from a decision making of a build versus buy? Like if you are you sit at the cross section of intersection of AI strategy, both sides of it from application standpoint. What would be your advice to the audience from a perspective of buy versus build? How companies are typically looking at, and if you wanna shed some light on that.
Yeah, no, ontology is very important. Like you said, context.
Hmm.
Uh, how do you use ontology is also very important, because you
Hmm.
can connect just data points. You can connect, enterprise context or the industry context with decisions, and then to data points.
Hmm.
So how do we bring some of these things together? I think
Hmm.
is critical as we discuss ontology. And I think um, most people are understanding what is possible with technology, and I think if a ready ontology layer that
Hmm.
can bring decisions or accelerate decisions, and hence the impact that you can make from those decisions in a reliable manner, like we were discussing,
Hmm.
it's fairly something that you would want to, you know buy and then contextualize for what you want to do in your company and your own context, as
Hmm.
long as there is confidence in, some of the things that we discussed, that it doesn't do anything wrong with my data, it just gives me explainability for decisions.
Hmm.
um, uh, because I mean, for long, banks are have been very clear that they're in the business of banking, right? Retail companies are very clear they're in the business of, retail merchandise, for example, etc. And they build technology teams as enablers to these, which can adopt, what's the best in class piece that they can adopt. So I think
Hmm.
that decision would always be there, based on how evolved some of the solutions are. But
Hmm.
being able to buy and then contextualize, uh,
Hmm.
using something that is reliable, I
Hmm.
think is the way to go for a lot of firms. Obviously, there are tech firms like Apples of the world; they may do it differently. But for the bulk, I would say that 80%, that may be the best way forward.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Ashwini. I think that was super helpful, some early context. Rishank, over to you. I think the audience want to really get into the meaty part of what is this whole ontology studio about and how is it
Yeah.
differentiated. So, uh,
Fair.
over to you.
Yeah. No, I think I'll do one of those moves where we build up to it and then give a crescendo. So, just a quick 2 minute overview before we get into the actual studio itself. I think there is a worldview of the context layer, and since we have been talking a lot about what is truly useful for the enterprise, and I think one key takeaway has been to make it auditable, verifiable, traceable across multiple people. What people think should be enough as a context layer is something like a semantic layer with a knowledge graph, and then you just put a rag over it. And the new pop culture word to market it has been a context graph, where everybody is now claiming that we have a context graph, a context layer, something of that sort. And this is what the reality in their worldview looks like, where you have certain like raw documents, structured tables, so on and so forth. You put it to a context layer, and somehow magically AI agents will start to work. But what we have been listening from customers and what we have been listening from the industry at large is that the semantic layer only helps AI understand certain keywords. It's like learning a dictionary. And then as the age-old adage goes, that change is the only constant. These keywords continue to change, whether across a temporal dimension, across teams, or in the industry at large, where there are new keywords always entering and old ones becoming stale. So this is not quite enough. So now what needs to be done? And this is where our worldview of cognitive ontology enters into the picture, which is what we are building, which is a like a world model of organizational decision dynamics. So think of it this way: that there are three sort of states or dimensions on which the context exists today of any enterprise whatsoever, which is more along the lines of one being a data ontology, So think of it as bringing together your structured and unstructured data together, the metrics, the entities, what are the join logics, what is the lineage or provenance that is needed along with it. The second is domain ontology, which is more like how is this business working specifically? So whatever is the general purpose intelligence out there, how does it encode the specific ways the processes are defined, the specific way the dependencies are defined, the specific ways the RCAs might be defined, so on and so forth. And the third aspect to it is the decision ontology. So typically, you go anywhere, you are never quite able to see decisions as a first class object, which is something that in our worldview is now enabled in the post LLM world. These are the kind of problems that now can be solved, which was not possible before, where you start treating decisions as first class objects with an associated goal, an associated outcome, typical trade offs or risks that you have taken, so on and so forth. And then this is what essentially the world model looks like in practice, where you have the raw enterprise reality out there. You have a perception and materialization layer, which is all about ingesting all of this, forming those causal models that are necessary, figuring out what the agentic control loops would look like, figuring out how to give the team a more sense of, as you continue to use, as you continue to reason, as you continue to run agents across it, there is a self-learning loops that are in play, of which a sense of control is always with you. It's governed basis how your reality looks like versus always having to adjust basis whatever platform you're using. And then eventually you reach an end state where you are able to do multi-layered reasoning, deep layered reasoning on top. So not just what or how, which is more of the BI world where there are some 200 dashboards, but get more into the deeper whys, figure out if there are certain operational workflows that can just be made autonomous, because now you have this much clarity pouring in from your systems today. And we look at this as more a state graph. So for any computer science nerd in the audience today, this all of these principles come from treating ontology as a finite state machine versus all the ways in which we have looked at it as a graph modeling problem with particular states, transitions, so on and so forth. And then it produces certain outcomes, which is something we'll come back to once you have actually gone through the studio. So let me actually pull up the platform now, all of this said and done. So is this the part where there should be background music and all of that, where there are drum rolls? But yeah. So say hello to the DecisionX platform. What you would see for the first thing is that there are multiple projects here. These are typically the work we've been doing across the board. And then for the purposes of the call today, we had a particular project ready called FinTech Risk. So I just have it handy here. Uh, Now, when you go to a particular project, the first thing to see is sources. So let us just go into that first. And here you would see a bunch of files that have been plugged in. Now, of course, you have all the usual ways of connecting data as well, where you have apps. So you can have your email, your Slack, all of that plugged in. You have your warehouses, BigQuery, Snowflake, so on and so forth. Now, of course, one of the reasons we also put it out here is that we are world number two on Spider 2.0. And one of the dimensions on which you get tested on the hardest enterprise reasoning benchmark in the world is being able to reason across warehouses from a single system. So all of that is here. Now, when it comes to this particular project, you will see a bunch of different data types and data sources. So here, what we have taken as a use case is risk analytics for fintech or financial services at large. So the first thing you would see is structured sources. So here you will have essentially like you click on any of these sources, you will see the purpose, the metric relationships, or data preview. You can, of course, go and see a full preview. So this one is more around monthly credit risk performance for DPD and like according to certain bands. So you would see a TU, a risk band, device bands, so on and so forth. You also have a whole POS master, which is essentially like a monthly loan performance and delinquency snapshot for any NBFC borrower out there. So it'll have all of your borrower ID, snapshot months, typical data that you either get as a dump or if you plug in, then the kind of structured data sets it produces. And then you also have collections data coming in. So essentially, if you're lending stuff out, you would want to see how much of that is actually coming back. And again, this contains all of your standard structured columns, bureau bands, age buckets, contact rates, so on and so forth. Now, coming back to the other data sources, just want to give a overall picture of what is out there. The second is policy calls. So this would be your typical SOPs that you would have written, certain operational workflows that you would have written, or some that would be existing in the industry and you have plugged in for your workflows. Third is collections calls, which is all transcripts. So one sense that you would be getting from all of this is quite a lot of data and quite a lot of data types, both structured and unstructured, both internal and external. So here you will have all of your transcripts. So typical collections would be happening, like calls would be happening across phones or even video calls in some matters. The fourth to this is Slack. So pretty much every financial service or fintech company out there would have certain Slack channels that would be centered around either a domain, a project, a feature, so on and so forth. So we have that here, typically like risk alerts, collections, portfolio risks, so on and so forth. Now, all of this is the data that has been put in this particular project. So introducing the Ontology Studio now. So if you click on Ontology, there are essentially three elements to it: make, manage, and maintain. So, make is all about what exists in the data, is something that we take out. And these are typically done across four dimensions. Second is manage, wherein we actually figure out how it all connects together in a state modeling way. So, we'll have the data graph, the decision graph, and how it is all interlinked together. Third is maintain, which is where we actually bring your human judgment in. So instead of starting from scratch of figuring out what our context is, how to model it, we actually surface the kind of conflicts that will come in handy as you keep building your ontology and try to use it downstream for reasoning or any end user application. So now getting deeper into make, the four dimensions being domain taxonomy, business metrics, decisions, and discussions. Domain taxonomy is where we bring all of the domain knowledge in. So here you would see the first thing being industry terminology. There are certain terms, their expanded meaning. What is the source from which it is coming in? The other aspect is industry frameworks. Now, typically, these would either be external frameworks or certain frameworks that might exist in your policy docs or your company, along with its relevance and description. As you go about reading through it, you can always chat to either get more context on what it is all about or just chat to update any definition in case you wanted to. So that exists in industry frameworks. Coming on to business metrics, this is more of a bottom up way of looking at your data today. So here there are metrics that have been pre-computed, the formulas that are then applicable for these particular metrics in your data. What are the particular data sources from which it is getting derived? So all of that becomes part of metrics. The other aspect to this is detected conventions. So of course, your data would be existing across certain key dimensions that would get reflected. And these are the conventions that are then taken out from there. The third aspect is decisions. Now, this is the part where all your unstructured data comes in handy. So what tends to happen is that if you have, let's say, policy docs, Slack threads, conversational transcripts, or any kind of unstructured data, you never quite have it in a queryable form. And the way a semantic layer would have dealt with it is it would have just used those unstructured data for data enrichment in structured databases and used that as sort of a enriched way of being able to query through a structured data. But what we enable in the first place is to make the unstructured data in itself queryable and then being able to use that to build the entire context out. So here you would see that there are typically two kinds of decisions that we have extracted. One is strategic, the other is operational. For every decision, you can actually see the rationale with which it has come about. What are the associated risks? What are the alternatives that were considered when this decision was being taken? What are the particular sources from which it has come? And also a version history of each decision that exists today. And typically, this versioning is done not just at an aggregate level, but at an individual object level. And you can either just remove as a decision in case this is something that does not seem like something you want to store for the long term, or you can convert it to a discussion. Now, discussions is the fourth object where we continue to track what are the kind of sort of objectives that are being worked toward, the kind of outcomes that are being worked toward that haven't exactly been converted to a decision yet, but it is something that you would want to always keep track of and always query through as you are either taking a new decision, trying to make an operational workflow, so on and so forth. So typically these discussions will have the people that are involved in it, what is the particular context, You can again choose to remove it in case you just want it out of your memory, or you can choose to convert it to a decision in case it's something that seems permanent and you want the system to store it with a associated goal and outcome that then the system would figure out how to extract and how to store together. So typically, these constitute all your make, or rather, bringing the structured and unstructured data together in an extracted format. Now, the key thing here
Before,
is manage.
before Rishank goes forward, so the point of make was that this is
Hmm,
all the ontology agents is building and doing autonomously. So it's not
hmm,
something that anyone needs to go manually do. The moment your data is in, you generate ontology, there's a button for that, and
hmm,
you can, this all of this ontology make is getting created in the studio.
hmm,
One quick point also, there is a button called as import. So a
hmm,
lot of companies that we work with essentially has already built their semantic model or data dictionary or
hmm,
bunch of metadata layers. So you can pretty much import that in here, or you can use some of the industry templates that we have. So let's say you're a CPG organization, you want to import the knowledge which you already have built over the period of time, then you
hmm.
can import that as well. So just want to call that out, Rishan.
Fair. So, how it helps is that in case you have also had an ontologist in your team and he or she might have done some work on owl or would have built a knowledge graph in a very um, graph esoteric language, all of that can be imported with the translation layer that we already have. So you can typically see an ontology import, a data dictionary, and a metrics definition. So whether that be a YAML, a JSON, or an Excel, all of that can be imported. Or you can just continue to type in normal English on how you view your business modeling today, and all of that gets incorporated as part of the ontology building. So,
So while the make is being shown here, the idea is that agents, ontology agents,
hmm,
take care of all the effort. You take months for, it takes months to build this ontology that gets done in hours, and pretty much then it becomes available for you to update, edit, take sort of conclusion on that.
fair. So I think there's a question that has come in just around this. Typical example of an ontology file that can be read manually. Does it look like a decision tree or taxonomy? Just to answer that, Nish, and as we go into manage, I think a lot more of this will get clearer. It does not need to look like a decision tree or taxonomy. That's not the kind of effort you would have to put in to begin with. It can just be as simple as an Excel file with metric definitions. It can also be something in, like, let's say, an OWL, Spark format that can be ingested directly in case there's some work that's already done. So that is typically how it can be imported. When we talk about having data agents, that is the kind of things that we are talking about, that can be sort of made into a plain file, extracted, and then brought into the whole connection building. So, So I think with this, let's move on to manage, because this is the part where the relationship building actually comes into play. So say hello to the world model. Here you would see a 3D modeling of of your entire cause and effect relationship or causal model of your business. There are two key portions to this: data and decisions. So before we go further, just a general sense of each. So when it comes to building relationships and data, instead of taking a very top-down approach, or a very ERD approach where you sort of build a entity architecture out and then people have to figure out, okay, what these relationship means, or having a more of a static sense of data, what we have here is entity, objects, and concepts. So think of entities as a top-down clustering of all the data that you have given. Objects is more the important tables or files that you have uploaded. And concepts typically consists of all your derived metrics, whether that be structured or unstructured. So here we can go to a 2D view in case you want to start going deeper into this. And of course, as we go deeper into this, you start noticing the connections. I haven't even switched on the cross-domain connections yet. This is all intra-domain. But if you click on any of them, you can actually see what it means. What is the granularity? What are the kind of connections that exist along with this particular node? So these can either be like summary detail, cross-domain, derives, contains. So there are typically 16 odd relationship node types that we have. And think of these relationship nodes as containing two key portions. One, of course, at a very data dictionary or data definition kind of layer, the other being more of a state transition layer, where if something is changing from one place to another, okay, this is a cross domain connection that we need to be aware of. If something is derived from something else, okay, this is something that we need to be aware of. And while all of this is just at a data level, what we have at the other end is decisions. So here you would typically see goals, discussions, and decisions, and how they are all being related to each other. So we can go into any one of them. So for example, here you would see a goal, um, which is sort of like the entire aspect. Let me just click into one more. So yeah, Priya decided to raise certain things. Now this became an operational decision. It contains other decisions that are like a portion of it. It depends on certain other, let's say, discussions that have taken place. It solves a particular goal, which is supposed to optimize collections on certain dimensions. So that level of granularity across each of these unstructured sources is what becomes a part of the whole decision layer or the decision ontology. And then you can keep going deeper into any of these aspects. So you can have a bunch of discussions here. And let's say I click on any of them. You can actually see what sort of discussion is enabling what sort of a goal, what is it resolving, so on and so forth. So all of this comes in together to actually become the causal model of your business. If you want to dive deeper into not just the edge types, which of course you can see here, but also into the kind of disambiguations or cross table mappings that are now taking place. You can actually go through that. So when it comes to disambiguations, I'm sure at any given point of time, there are terms which you'd never quite know which table to default to. So we bring all of that out as well, where you can actually see the table that it belongs to, what is the confidence score. In case you want to update something, you can update directly. What is the join logic of columns that connect across those tables? And again, in anything you want to change, you can change here. But this is what the causal model actually looks like in practice, and it can keep getting more complex as more data comes in. So, for example, with one of the pharma companies that we are working with closely, if you look at their globe, it actually looks like every country has been pinpointed there as a discussion or a decision there. So, stuff like that. So, now we get into maintain, and this is the part where uh, you start getting more into how to actually manage this ontology, because while teams focus on one time build out and trying to model their business at least in a static manner to begin with, the the key challenges, much like most things in life, comes in when you have to maintain things together or hold the systems together, as pretty much everyone in the audience would relate to. So there are two key portions to it when it comes to manage. One is conflicts, the other is your ontology at a glance or your health. So when it comes to conflicts, we surface the kind of ontology conflicts that come in at both a data level and a decision level. So when it comes purely to data, you would see that there are certain categories of conflicts that we come up with, whether that be at a definitions level, a relationship level, a schema level, a formula, a data quality, or just your sources, where there might be something going wrong in how the app has been integrated with, or what might be coming in downstream as a schema reference. So all of that comes in, and now you can actually go through any of these conflicts to get a granular understanding of what it is coming through. So there are technical details of what a particular sort of conflict is supposed to talk about. In case it is something that you yourself may not have a lot of context on, because typically as data teams, you are a little away from how the business realities are working, and you would want to get a lot closer to it without actually having to ping a lot of people and getting onto a meeting. You can just ask the chat screen here to explain something. So let's say you ask to explain it, it will go through the request, it will figure out what are the particular columns of which things are being talked about. And while that is going on, maybe I can just give you a general glance of the kind of conflicts that are coming in. So if you go to schema today, you can actually filter by type of whether it's an aggregation issue, a cross table issue, a record level, or a file format level, and you can just continue to filter it. Under relationships, you have typically temporal or provenance. And then, of course, in all, we have everything. Coming back to what the system has surfaced. So it pretty much brings all the context needed for you to take a stance on what this conflict is and how you can go about it. So, for example, here it talks about the summary of this item, what category of conflict it belongs to, what are the tables that are getting affected, and how it might downstream affect you. So there are certain 36 rows and 270 rows in particular columns which get affected because of this conflict. gives you a much more simpler way to look at what the conflict actually is. And essentially, yeah, why a direct join would probably end up inflating your number. So what would be the outcome of this conflict as you go about reasoning it, and what are certain things that the system has observed. And essentially at the end of it, it tries to give you why this happens at a conceptual level. So if, let's say, you always look at one conflict type or a particular conflict, you never quite want things to happen downstream of it, and these are things that you would want to take care of either at ingestion or at just the file level. So these are the kind of things that then get surfaced. You can either choose to resolve it here directly, or you can also continue to use the system in reasoning. And then those are the kind of places where, again, we surface this in context to the kind of reasoning that you're doing. So while all of this was data conflicts, there is the other aspect to it, which is decisions conflicts. So typically here as well, you will have certain dimensions to look at the kind of conflicts that are coming in. You can just think of this entire hub as your data analytics team's hub of context, or a GitHub of context, if you will. And here you would see that there are certain dimensions of owners, gaps, duplicates, and like confidence. So again, you can just go through what it actually looks like in practice. So you can probably look at gaps, for example, and you can go and view details where you can actually see, okay, this is the particular decision, what is the rationale, why is it actually coming across as a conflict, ask about this or add more risks to give the system more clarity and help it resolve it. So this, in essence, brings the entire ontology together. And maybe we can spend some 5 minutes going through certain reasoning queries to actually see it in action. So, yeah, if there are any questions, would love to answer it, or maybe we can get you.
So, Rishank, we have someone from the audience, Naveen. He has a question. How is the model effective in generating contextually relevant outcomes based on user input? Probably we can see in reasoning, I believe.
Fair. Yeah.
So we should be able to see it there. But
You
just
can.
while Rishank is opening the reasoning, this ontology is what on
Hmm.
which the whole of our enterprise reasoning is grounded on. The key differentiators that I would like to bring out is one, it's not a
Hmm.
semantic graph, it's not a metadata lineage kind of structure. It's a lot more causal understanding of relationships built across various node types,
Hmm.
be it your decision or be it your data, and
Hmm.
probably very comprehensive approach, at least in our worldview, we have taken to bring in
Hmm.
what we can extract, what our ontology agents can extract out of data autonomously,
Hmm.
what we can bring in from a top-down domain perspective knowledge,
Hmm.
and how we can extract decisions from the unstructured data.
Yeah.
So data domain decisions together becomes the most sophisticated way to look at actually, or more comprehensive way to look at actually all kinds of things that's happening in a particular enterprise.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rishank.
Fair. So, with that understanding, if we get to, let's say, reasoning today, you would see that there are particular kind of reasoning that you can always run, and we typically have this setup right up the bat for people who are working with us. So, on the first bit, where let's say we are bringing in unstructured data together, we have something called blind spots that actually gives you a general sense of how this entire unstructured piece actually becomes queryable and how you can start making a lot more use of it. So maybe I'll just put in any question in natural language, and this will be a good test of the system. Hopefully, Murphy's law won't hit us. Uh, let's say, what are the top decisions that have been uh, taken to tackle loan repayment? I think those that was one thing that we have been talking about constantly. So should be a good thing to check the system on. Um, in case, Ranjan sir, you would want any question to put in, we'd be happy to include that as well.
Oh, good enough. Let's go ahead with that, and while it runs, we can
Yeah.
um, we can wait. And so basically, it shows all the steps that it's thinking through
Yeah.
to get the answers. And
So
meanwhile, you can show some RCA probably that might be helpful.
fair. So just to give a general sense of what is actually happening here, you can actually see that it's exploring the context, it's connecting the question about top decisions to certain tables or certain values that you want to go through. And then it eventually comes up with these are the top decisions that are taken to tackle loan repayment delays. We typically give you two things. One is a summarized snapshot, and the other is more of a deep dive. In summarize snapshot, this is more of a governed layer where everybody gets to see summarize snapshots in a certain way, because everybody has a certain taste and every team has certain priorities. So we always bring that forth. Uh, so here you would see, for example, that the main actions have been focused on aligning repayment dates with certain things. There are certain key themes. There are decision clusters to look into, and you can essentially go through all of that. And there is an overall takeaway to take care of. You can always ask a follow-up question of how did you arrive at this, or you can just go and see the deep dive. So when you look at deep dive, you can actually see the entire rationale of what all has come together. And if there are certain elements that you want to play around with, you can always do that. So while this was more of just being able to see how decisions are queried, you can also actually see, so for example, with a decision, the entire version history that has been kept together, how it actually plays a huge role when you are trying to take high stakes decisions on top of it, or trying to figure out what are certain operational workflows that can be done more. So maybe we can run one of that, and then we straight dive into RCA, which is more of the deep reasoning aspects of it. So let's say which of these decisions have been overlooked till now, and the risks are becoming important with, let's say, moving business targets or something of that sort. So yeah, as it goes about doing that, maybe we can get back to reasoning, unless of course we start seeing a lot more of exploring coming in, and then maybe we can just wait a minute and actually see the answer in practice before going into it. Okay, so I can actually see it connecting like 6 requested actions to the right evidence, and then it's processing. So it's sort of bringing out what sort of format the answer should come to. So yeah, you can actually see the kind of decisions, timings, and overlooked risk. You would also see certain guardrails coming in as part of the answer, where there might be certain things that have a same underlying decision with certain sense, and you can also review certain non-conclusions, so on and so forth. So yeah, getting back to reasoning now, let's get into RCA, because one of the key things that we have seen teams spend a lot of time on is RCA, and typically, like there are always analyst bottlenecks to deal with. So when it comes to, let's say, RCA, since we had all the DPD data coming in, right? So let's just ask something around why near prime 15 DPD has deteriorated.
So one of the things while Rishank is pulling out the question I want to call out was that unless you don't have a causal
Hmm.
context layer, it's very hard to answer the why questions. So if
Hmm.
you plug in straight up people who are not using enough of context layer, using some sort of a
Hmm.
non-causal metadata based kind of context layer, I think answering the
Hmm.
why questions, which is multi-layered, like I want to know why something has deteriorated, the underlying reasoning to it might be multi-layered. So
Hmm.
unless the causal model does not exist in your ontology, or the ontology is not
Hmm.
causal in nature, I think the system hallucinates and does not give you a grounded answer in your organizational depth. So that's one call out we want to do. So pretty much in our case, the reasoning you can use for RCA forecasting,
Hmm.
more complex operation like optimization, which is very multi-layered in nature, and question
Hmm.
you can ask pretty much like a natural language. Uh,
Yeah.
so go ahead, Sam.
So, for example, in this particular question, it actually went through everything, figured out that the deterioration appears to be driven more by cohort or vintage mix than by a broad macro shock, and it does not cleanly support any other drivers that could be. Gives you the headline deterioration metrics and what are sort of the drivers that could have contributed and how the data looks at it today. So there could be a macro context that could be coming in, the origination vintage that could be coming in, and how do you particularly read through it, and ultimately gives you a bottom line of what is the most likely driver, what is the less likely primary driver, and what are the sort of hypothesis that it has invalidated given all the evidence that is out there. And while ultimately this is all in summarized, in deep dive you can actually go through the entire rationale of what were the kind of hypothesis that was considered, what is the kind of evidence that you were able to come up with, what those key findings look like. So for example, it's not mainly macro driven, but certain things else. Where has the deterioration actually peaked? What are the effects that are likely a major driver? So on and so forth. it also gives to you the table joins that are performed in between, so that you always have a sense of this is how the data is being worked to. In case you are in a regulatory industry, we also give you the entire trail or the reasoning chain of how this has come about. And then you can essentially see the entire implications and actionable recommendations on top, along with, of course, the referenced decision log that was actually used. So, one thing that we explicitly want to point out here is that unlike just enriching structured data with whatever exists out there, you now since have an entire separate decision object. This is how it actually helps you in going through an RCA as you are pretty much going about it. We can continue to ask more questions, but also in sense of time, just wanted to check if the audience has more questions. Else, we can also sum up our core worldview with what we have seen today. And yeah,
So I think team does not have any, like I'm not seeing any further question. I think that was the last question, which is how's the model effective? I hope that's good, that got answered for Naveen. A quick question, Rishank, I have before you take up this slide and conclude. Uh,
sure.
Pretty much, if I have to sum it up in terms of if I would have asked the same
Hmm.
set of complex, let's say forecasting question for a sales kind of scenario, right?
Hmm.
Um, what are the essentially difference that you would
Hmm.
see if you are using something like a multi-layered reasoning where you have a causal ontology versus
Hmm.
something which is a little more like a metadata,
Hmm.
essentially knowledge graph in that sense. If
Fair.
you want to give a just a very high level
Hmm.
human English uh, answer to that.
No, fair. That's a good question, and that's something that we keep coming across as more and more people get accustomed to the new worldview and sort of start using it. Um, so I think there are three key aspects to it. So if you have, let's say, a metadata platform, what you're right off the bat leaving out of the table or right of the plate is the entire aspect of all the discussions that have been taking place in your organization. So these can be internal conversations, external facing conversations. These could be all the policies that you would have figured out, all the SOPs that you would have come up with. And these are things that you are simply not taking into consideration simply because you have now started to use this as just a crutch for your structured data instead of actually using them also as a source of truth. So that sort of becomes the first problem. The second and far more important problem becomes that each time you're trying to do an RCA with whatever metadata platform could be out there or a data catalog platform out there, is that at any given point of time, if there is any metric that has deteriorated, you never quite know if the metric definition itself has changed, if something in the drivers have changed, and you're always sort of reasoning backward from it. So instead of treating it as a deep reasoning problem with its own infrastructure, you make it a retrieval problem and try to figure out if there have been certain RCAs done in the past. Can we use that to figure stuff out for this particular case or this particular logical flow? And that never quite works. So that is there where it's sort of reasoning not just backwards in time, but also backwards in terms of if an event hasn't taken place, we'll never be able to RCA from it because we just never have a model of how the business actually works. And the third and the most important piece is that as you continue to reason, so let's say there are new kinds of RCA that are coming in. And even if, let's say, on top of a metadata platform, you have multi-layered agents that are working in tandem, you are never quite able to maintain that state of business together, and you have to spend manual effort or bring in certain other like points as solutions to sort of maintain that, and that in itself becomes a workaround work that you now have to spend time in, even though you might have ambitions to take your business 10x. So these are sort of the three buckets in which we have seen that when you try to do an RCA with a metadata platform or with a bunch of tools plugged in together, where you have a metadata platform, multi-agentic system with some amount of custom work done in, you are never quite able to do an RCA or get to that utopian vision of being able to do an RCA in 10 minutes. So, which is
Correct.
typically where you want to be at. So yeah.
I keep calling it that retrieval versus causal. Also,
Yeah.
like a map versus a mind. I think these are two different things. I have a like there's a question from Nish.
Yeah.
Very helpful. I see it being a good assistant to help me understand vast amounts of data to help make decision. But how can the expert knowledge codified in the ontology be used to connect the BAU processes and automate intelligently? What is the architecture involved to bring it all to life at enterprise scale for a complex open-ended process like, say, AML investigation?
Fair. So if I have to break this into two parts, I think what the question is referring to is, of course, there would be no, thanks for bringing those questions in. So yeah, I mean, there are just, I think, two parts to this, or two buckets. First is that how can you connect it to your BAU processes and use it for, let's say, operational autonomy? The second part is that when there is like an enterprise scale of data and there are complex open-ended processes where you actually need human judgment, how you actually use the system together. So to answer the second part first, where when it comes to enterprise scale of data, typically we have seen that there are three dimensions to it. One is, of course, just the volume of data. Second is the data type, whether it's internal, external, structured, unstructured. Third is the kind of relationships that exist between them. And there, when we talk about the way our cognitive ontology has worked, pretty much the outcomes come up in reasoning, right? So, for example, in Spider 2.0, for the uninitiated, what it actually tests for is reasoning at an enterprise level. So, Snowflake typically has nested queries, for example. BigQuery has its, of course, its own query language called BQL, and you want to figure out what those columnar definitions are. It is SQLite, which is more academic oriented database. So across all of these three databases, how can a system perform? And you can't quite game it. You can't even use any off-the-shelf model to sort of score high on it. And that is typically where we rank number two in the world. Number one is the Oracle AI science team, and we were like one question away. The other teams that are there in the top 10 include the likes of a Samsung, a Snowflake, a Tencent, but just the value of the approach that we have taken speaks so highly that we are able to rank that high. So I think that should bring some sense to the second question, where we are able to handle data at an enterprise scale, and then at any given point of time, if you want to bring more context in or review what is being done, you always have the Ontology Studio where things are coming in. Of course, we could have tried a little bit of reasoning to see that, but those are the things that we would be happy to send across after the webinar. The first thing was more along how can the expert knowledge. Okay, so essentially, whatever has been in a BAU process till now, how can all of that come in? So there are again two portions to this. One, as part of the Ontology Studio itself, you can sort of import your processes in. You can bring in a process doc if you want. In fact, if you're talking to me right now and you have a meeting transcription on, you can just put in that, and all of that gets plugged in. The other angle to that is that if you uh, simply want to set in certain processes on the go as you're reasoning, you can always have that as part of the reasoning chain or the chat to ontology. So these are typically the way things come in together. So yeah, hope that answers. Yeah.
Sure. Just in interest of time, I think would like to conclude with this slide. I think
Fair. So just to put it all together, there is a semantic layer worldview that exists out there where ontology is all about just a meaning layer. Like you just bring in an FD, he or she talks to you, figures out a data catalog, a data dictionary, and then goes ahead. The goal is just to build some form of a trusted context, which is more vibes than actual quantifiable way of looking at it. And the end state is just better enterprise co-pilots, right? But in our worldview, what ontology is a state model, a state graph, and it's sort of like a world model of your decision dynamics that's always changing on the go. It has a temporal nature to it, it has a categorical nature to it, so on and so forth. And we treat decisions as first class objects. So we want to bring the causality not just from what exists in the data, but also what is out there. And I think there was this really nice quote by Grady Booch, who is the creator of the UML, like Unified Markup Language, which like most of us would have come across. And he had mentioned long back, this is right when the LLM wave was starting, that as we continue to build more in AI, I think what we'll continue to discover is what it means to be truly human. I think as we continue to build more agentic systems on top and the cognitive ontology that we have today, it's wonderful learnings that we take out of it, and it's wonderful learnings that our customers are able to take out of it, along with meaningful outcomes. So that's there. So yeah, I think with that, we would like to call this webinar to a close. And yeah,
thanks a lot, Rishank. I think we overshot by about 8 minutes, but hopefully this was helpful. We'll come up with more webinars where we can show more live session of asking question.
yeah,
We'll reach out with recording of this particular webinar. Thanks, Ashwini. Thanks a lot for taking out time. And thanks, Rishank, to answer all the questions. Thanks, everyone, for joining in. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Enjoy.